Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. Dr. Brian Brown is a peak performance and longevity strategist. He speaks to the heart of high achievers who love taking ownership of their wellness journey because they know it's the most prized investment. And when they're in peak performance state, their productivity and revenue soar. When working with high-level entrepreneurs, influencers, and CEOs, Dr. Brown helps them move from great to extraordinary. He does this by crafting a custom-tailored wellness plan that helps them uncover hidden imbalances, dominate at the peak performance level, and optimize for life longevity. Check him out at briangBrown.com or on Insta at The Optimal CEO, and I'll put those in the show notes. But absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Dr. Brian Brown.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I love to find out about your story and now how you're helping influencers and entrepreneurs and CEOs. So maybe you could start by maybe telling us how you maybe 10 years ago had a psychiatric practice, I believe, and now more into practicing functional and integrative medicine.
Yeah. So that question actually throws my colleagues for a loop as well, because they're like, how did you transition from psychiatry to functional medicine? It was actually quite natural for me. I had a 16-year journey with depression and on 9 different antidepressants, all to find out that the issues that were going on were related to a childhood injury where I was electrocuted at age 5 that caused severe adrenal imbalances over the course of my life. And once I started working on the foundational root causes of what was going on, and mind you, I'd gone through retraining myself because my own professional medical training had really failed me in finding the answers. The only answers I had were to work with a colleague and go from one antidepressant to another, and it just wasn't working. I might get a little relief, and then the side effects would far outweigh the benefits, and I would have to switch to the next one. And that was a 16-year journey. But when I started treating root causes, everything started turning around. I started losing weight. I had gained up to almost 400 pounds and started losing weight. My mood started improving. The brain fog went away. And everything just got better, and it continues to get better and better with time. It's been a 10-year journey for me personally. And I would say the first 2 years were a little slow, and the last 8 years have just rapidly been accelerating in improvement.
Wow, Dr. Brown, it sounds extraordinary because, and slightly ironic, you were a psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't you have been able to work or help other people with depression and therefore perhaps help yourself, or is it not quite the way it works?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. We have to go to the root of the traditional allopathic medical training. And the medical training really centers around symptom management, not really root cause management. We know that if a person struggles with depression, which typically is a symptom of something greater, we can take care of those symptoms for most people, but we're not really treating the root cause. And so what I did is I learned how to treat that root cause in myself. And then I started implementing that with my patients, and my practice gradually transitioned over to this functional medicine practice where people come in who either A, want to get off of antidepressants, or B, they want to avoid going on antidepressants altogether. And that's only now, 10 years later, that's only just one piece of what I do because we do so much more than that. But you're exactly right. My path led me to be able to helping others overcome those same issues.
Can you talk us through perhaps either with a client or with yourself how you dealt with the root causes? Because I feel like it's not quite as easy as it sounds. It's so much easier just to give someone a drug.
Yeah. No, I love that question because I get that all the time. It is much easier just to, as I call it, poke a pill down somebody's throat than it is to dig in and really work with that client and find those root causes. When a client comes in to work with me, we do a very intensive screening process over the phone to make sure that, A, we can help them and they're a right fit for our clinic. And once we've determined that, then we go ahead and order a series of diagnostic tests. And when they sit down with me, they have had we have all the tests in hand, and we start going over all of their patient history, their medical history, and tying it into the imbalances that we're seeing on these diagnostic tests. Typically, people have gone to multiple medical providers and been kind of patted on the back and told, everything's okay, your lab work is normal. And that's because the lens that traditional medical providers are looking through, just like I used to do, is not necessarily the correct lens. We have to switch lenses that we look through in order to find those root causes. And when you know what you're looking for, they're almost staring you in the face. But a typical initial evaluation with me goes about 2 hours. If we need to take more time, we take more time. Sometimes it's a little bit less, but typically it's around 2 hours for the initial consult. And then I spend 1 hour with each patient on follow-up. And it's key that to understand that when you're looking at root causes, because it is difficult to get to the bottom of what's going on, we have to take the time with clients. And the unfortunate thing is that the insurance industry keeps reducing reimbursement. And let's face it, medical practices are economically driven if they're taking insurance. And if their reimbursement is going down, that means they're forced to see more patients per hour. And that translates to they spend less time with you. And that translates to not being able to get to the root cause. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So in the case, say in your case, how did you start? Where did you start? Because obviously depression was an issue, and then did you start looking at where that depression came from, or were you also looking at other health issues? Like I know you went through Hashimoto's and obviously obesity and heart issues. So, and I think you were even suffering some sort of adrenal fatigue. So where did you start in your case, and how did you start sort of dealing with those root causes?
So the very first place I started was dealing with the Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition. And when I was able to identify that was one of the things that was going on, I started on the proper treatment protocol, and things started improving. Now, usually there reaches a point when there's multiple things going on where you go, okay, now it's time to move on to the next thing on the list. But we typically prioritize that list into what's the most important for this client right now. And it's different for every person. But the next thing I worked on at that point was the fact that I had hormonal imbalances. And we started working on getting those balanced. And then the next thing was gut health. Typically, when you deal with an autoimmune patient, you're typically dealing with some type of leaky gut type syndrome, which again feeds the adrenal insufficiency. So taking care of the gut next, and once we got the gut under control, then start working on the adrenals, and then just tweaking or modifying in those areas as you progress along. Subsequently, just in the past couple of years, with the advent of NeuroGenomic testing, went back and did some genetic testing in the past 2 to 3 years. And that has even opened up more doors to understand the depth of what's going on and being able to nutritionally battle those other types of issues.
And was depression sort of the biggest issue at the time, or was that sort of the first on the line to be dealt with, or?
Yeah, no, depression for me was the first thing to deal with, but understanding the toll that depression took on my life, in that there's no motivation, there was no energy, there was brain fog, and again, learning later that was probably related to all of the imbalances, those root causes that were leading to that. It didn't necessarily tackle the depression head on, because I'd had a 16-year proof that antidepressants weren't working for me. So when I started taking care of the Hashimoto's, and then the hormone imbalances, and then the gut health, and then the adrenals, the mood just kept improving. Within the first 3 years of treatment, I was completely off of antidepressants. So it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer for anybody. to deal with it. But yeah, you've got to jump in where it's most critical for that patient, and understanding their journey, where they came from, plays into that decision.
Yeah, I'm interested. I mean, just to sort of delve a bit deeper, I'm interested to know why you dealt with hormones before gut, because I know some doctors would say, well, that everything starts in the gut, and, healthy gut, healthy you is a popular book at the moment. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So when I say we dealt with hormones before gut, it didn't mean that we left gut off the table. We were working on gut, but we weren't deep diving into all of the issues with the gut. We were putting basic measures in place, like I did a specialized type of testing that looks at food inflammatory response in the gut. And it tests for 170 different foods and spices and things like that, and eliminated those immediately. Got on a really good gut health protocol as far as the right rotating system of probiotics. And I was hydrochloric acid deficient, so we added that in there. So that was happening at the same time as the hormone treatment. But it wasn't until about 9 months into hormone treatment that we decided, okay, let's transition heavily into this gut health. It was just the naturopath that I was working with at the time, and we were collaborating on this because I had that knowledge as well. And I questioned that. I said, okay, why don't we work on the gut next? And she said, well, I feel like if we don't get a handle on the hormone balance, we're not going to take care of the mood the way we need to, and we need to get a handle on that as quickly as possible, as well as the relationship between the adrenals and the hormone balance. So it wasn't that we weren't working on the gut; it's that we didn't dive as heavily into the gut until we got a base level of hormone stability on board.
Right, and so I'm still interested in this depression piece. Where if yet, did that start resolving itself? I mean, I assume that there was some connection there. Once you started feeling healthier, your Hashimoto's was in order, your hormones were in order, your gut was starting to feel good. Was that then? Did that then lead to depression sort of being less, or how did that work?
Yeah. So over the course of the first 3 years of my treatment journey, I just naturally recognized that, I don't think I need as much of the antidepressant as much. So I would cut back a little bit. And if that worked, I would cut back a little bit more. And it was kind of this up and down journey, because sometimes I would cut the dose back and I would say, oh, no, I can't back off of that just yet. I would have withdrawal side effects, or the depression or anxiety would creep back in. So it was this journey over 3 years of just, if you looked at it on a graph, it would be this zigzag line, but it was trending down, where I would go down, and I would go too far down. I'd have to increase it a little bit, but I was overall trending down on the dose. And in about 3 years of that first 3 years of treatment, by the end of year 3, I was completely off of antidepressants, and have been off of them ever since. And that's been about 7 years ago. So, glad to say that I'm completely off of antidepressants. They're lifesavers for some people, don't get me wrong, but in my particular case, it was not the thing that I needed to be on.
So, Dr. Brown, would you say there's a strong correlation then between your health and the depression? Because I don't like to pigeonhole depression, and I'm sure depression changes depending on the person. But in your case, was it correlated to your health?
The depression directly correlated to my health. I mean, when you're depressed, at least for me, and having worked in practiced psychiatry for so many years, and I saw this play out in my own patients. When you're depressed, your motivation goes down significantly. Your drive, your zeal for life, it just is almost non-existent. You have to really put forth a lot of effort and a lot of mental and physical energy just to live everyday life. And I was one of the fortunate ones that I never had to stop working. I was able to keep working. It definitely affected my physical health because, I mean, when you're depressed and you have no energy, the last thing you want to do is eat right. The last thing you want to do is go to the gym. You force yourself to do those things, but you don't do them as readily as you would if you were feeling better or feeling non-depressed. It's a vicious cycle. It's kind of the chicken or egg thing. Which came first, the depression or the poor health or what? It's kind of hard to say. I think in my particular case, the adrenal insufficiency that journey had started around age 5 in my early childhood years, just kind of mounted to the point that it took its toll on my neurotransmitter health and every other piece of my health.
Wow. And how did you track that back to when you were 5?
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing story. So at age 5, I was electrocuted, but I didn't remember that at the time. I just knew that I had started having night terrors around the age of 5 and carried them into my adult years. Now, I had no recollection of being electrocuted until years later, and I'll get to that in a second. But I remember sitting in lecture one day in my medical training, and the professor said, less than 1% of children will carry this into adulthood. I questioned the professor on that, and the professor said, well, you're just in that less than 1% category. Night terrors are benign. Don't worry about it. So I didn't think another thing about it. And fast forward to age 45, and my primary symptoms were I would wake up in the middle of the night gasping for breath, heart racing, and had a hard time breathing. And that had been happening since I was a child, usually multiple times per night, at least one time per night, usually 2 to 3 times per night. Age 45, I have one of those episodes during the day while I was driving, and I almost wrecked my vehicle. And it scared me enough that I drove myself to a cardiologist office, a friend of mine, and they did the Cadillac workup, and everything came back normal. So they put an extended wear monitor on me. And when we got the results back from that, the first night I wore it, my heart had stopped 3 times in the middle of the night. And long story short, ended up at a specialist. They're called electrophysiologists. They just work on the electrical system of the heart. And I had heart damage from the electrocution. And I ended up with a pacemaker. And it was when I discovered that that the heart was jump-starting itself back into rhythm by dumping natural adrenaline into my bloodstream, just like you would see in an emergency room situation with a person that's had a heart attack. They would give them epinephrine. That's what my body was doing. It was dumping high doses of epinephrine into my bloodstream to jumpstart my heart back. Well, I knew from my training that anytime a person is putting out high doses of natural adrenaline or norepinephrine, cortisol will follow that. And cortisol is what caused too high of cortisol causes anxiety, causes depression, it causes weight gain, and the list goes on and on and on. And then you layer in on top of that an autoimmune thyroid condition and so on and so forth. Then you've got a perfect storm for creating mood issues and weight gain and everything that I struggled with. So when I talk about identifying and treating root causes, we're looking at multiple possibilities for what could be causing this problem. Every person is unique in their journey, that's for sure. But yeah, it was an interesting way to find out that the adrenals were what was causing the weight gain, and subsequently what was causing the adrenal problem was the adrenals dumping that high dose of epinephrine into my bloodstream, and due to my heart stopping.
Wow. Well, I dare say you've pretty much covered all the issues that one could have in their journey. So you're a good person to talk to. And I've heard you talk about hydration and how that was a big part of your wellness journey. Can you let us know a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I was one of those really stubborn people when it came to hydration. I was like, I have coffee in the morning, I have tea at lunch, and maybe stop by the water fountain at the office and drink every now and then some water, and but then have tea again at night with my evening meal. And I was really stubborn about it. And then it dawned on me one day, I was just going back to basic medical training, is that your body is mostly water. And it was like, I can't be doing myself any favors by not drinking water. So I started researching the proper amounts of water to drink for a male versus a female, and learned that females typically need at least 3 liters of water per day. Males need about 4 liters of water per day. If you're exercising very regularly, or it's really hot outside, you're probably going to need more than that. And then the next question that I had to deal with was, well, I'm just not thirsty for water. I don't want to drink water. And then I learned that your body has a natural thirst drive. And in order to not torture you when you're in a dehydrated state, it cuts off. So your natural thirst drive will cut off and you will not crave water. But when you start drinking water, and it usually takes 2 to 5 days for the average person to cut on their natural thirst drive, you'll then begin craving water, and you'll think, 3 or 4 liters per day is not enough. And that's okay. That's a good place to be. The next natural question I usually get when people talk about hydration is, don't you worry about electrolyte depletion? Yeah, if you're one of those people that's prone to mild cramping or feeling like your electrolytes are dropping, every other liter of water, you can just put a pinch of pink Himalayan salt in there. That's a multi-mineral salt that's naturally occurring, and it's very good for the body, and you really can't taste it in the water. But yeah, it was huge for me. And I subsequently, when I got on board with drinking water and started using it with my patients, I found that patients that struggled with depression and anxiety, before we even got their imbalances corrected, they would actually start seeing improvement in their mood and their anxiety and sleep just by getting water on board. So I am a firm believer that it is medicine number one is making sure we're properly hydrated.
You're not alone there. I've spoke to a lot of doctors recently, and there's a lot of talk now about the mitochondria and how important it is to hydrate ourselves. So for just mitochondrial health in general.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And I've got to ask you, you mentioned something about being 400 plus pounds. How heavy are you now, and how have you managed to keep that weight off?
Yeah, I'm 250 pounds now, and it's like I said, it's been a journey. Am I at the weight that I want to be? Absolutely not. Does the average American gain 2.2 pounds per year, or 1 kilo? The answer is yes. Do I take off more than 1 kilo per year? The answer is yes. And my body goes through stages where I will plateau. And I'm okay with that, because it's resetting those set points chemically in my body and allowing me to stair step down. But gradually, my body keeps taking weight off, and that's exactly the way I want to do it. But yeah, it's been a journey, and that's why I say, people that need to lose weight, it's the mantra there is be patient in the process, because we don't want that weight to come off quickly. If the weight comes off quickly, I've done just about every fad diet there is known to man, and when the weight comes off quickly, it comes back on quickly plus. And when it comes off slowly, your body has time to adjust, and it resets to those new set point levels, and you're just successful. But if we look at the root of weight management, the root of weight management is insulin regulation. Dr. Jason Fung, I had the distinct pleasure of spending the weekend with him this weekend at a conference that he did. And that's all we talked about was hyperinsulinemia, or high insulin levels in the body, and how to properly regulate those with tools. And it's just a tool, intermittent fasting. And so, yeah, it's all about just getting your head wrapped around lifestyle changes, not necessarily I don't like to use the D word, the diet word, because it's not a diet. A diet denotes short term. We're looking at lifestyle changes, things that are workable with a client.
Mm. Interesting. And you mentioned at the start that one of the first things you do is you determine whether the client is a good fit for your clinic or for you to help them. How do you determine whether a client's a good fit? What sort of issues do they need to be having in order for you to think that you can help them?
Right. So typically, if the client is struggling with an autoimmune condition, we handle that extremely well in my practice. If they're struggling with thyroid imbalances or hormone imbalances, if they're a high performance person and they're just struggling with brain fog and fatigue, and they don't really know why that's happening, typically we will start with NeuroGenomic testing and just really get a good picture genetically of how this person responds to their environment, and then put measures in place to help them help their body work as compatibly as possible with the environment that they're in. People that struggle with depression and are not suicidal, I typically don't like to work with acutely depressed patients until they're on the chronic train where they're being well managed, or the maintenance train. Chronic probably is not a good word, but they're on the maintenance train. Everything's kind of settled down. They're not suicidal. They're on antidepressants. They don't want to be on antidepressants, and we will take a look at options for what that looks like to help them transition off of those types of treatments. I don't see kids. We get a lot of phone calls asking us to see children or adolescents. From a liability standpoint, I just don't do that because when you are talking about alternative treatments, it's in the environment that we live in the United States. It's dicey enough to work with an adult and use alternative treatment options. It's even more dicey to work with children. So we typically will screen out children and adolescents. If they're over 18, we will start working with them, but not until then. So that's pretty much everyone we work with. Now, when a person gets in with me for the initial consultation, every now and then I'll run into a previously undisclosed trauma. And I will test at that point to see whether or not that person is emotionally ready to take on, lifestyle changes that we're talking about using. And they're not drastic, but sometimes when you're a trauma survivor, the least little changes can seem drastic, and it makes you less likely to succeed. So I have several cases where I've actually referred clients for a specific type of trauma therapy called EMDR. For several months, and then have them come back at a designated period of time, say 3 or 6 months, and see whether or not they're ready to proceed. And hands down, every single client that I've ever done that with has come back and told me, "Thank you. You were right. I was not ready to do this, but I'm ready now." And they're some of my most successful clients. I'm not about making a dollar. I'm about doing what's right for the client. And if that means turning them away until they're ready, emotionally ready, until they're physically ready, then that's what we need to do. Now, I don't send them out empty-handed. I give them a plan and said, okay, if I were you, I would do this, this, and this. I give them 3 things to do. And I'll say, let's touch base back in 3 to 6 months and see where you are on that. And like I said, hands down, they come back and tell me thank you every single time.
Excellent. You mentioned thyroid and thyroid health, and it seems to be a controversial issue in the integrated health space at the moment. There's some people sort of claiming, a couple of doctors in particular, I think Dr. Michael Ruscio sees in his clinic that a lot of people are being overdiagnosed with thyroid issues and potentially them not being actual thyroid issues as such. But it does tend to be quite predominant in people. And how would one know whether they potentially might have some sort of thyroid issue?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you're correct. It's very controversial. because you've got a traditionally minded system that they don't understand the way we look at things on the functional medicine side, because it's the difference in normal thyroid function versus optimal thyroid function. And what I mean by that is your thyroid marker numbers, and I'm going to speak to low thyroid. Your thyroid marker numbers may be on the low end of normal, but to a traditionally trained person, they're perfectly fine. We don't need to actually pursue any further doing anything with that. To a functional medicine person, we know that back in 2002, between 1998 and 2002, there was this great debate that went on to raise the standards for making it more difficult to diagnose hypothyroidism or low thyroid. And the battle was won in that respect, in that they then raised the TSH, the acceptable thyroid stimulating hormone level, to 5.0. Previously, it had been 3.5. So now we have this plethora of people that are over 3.5 on their TSH, and they're not doing well at all. They have things like low energy, fatigue, constipation, thinning hair, thin, brittle nails. They feel cold all the time. Sometimes they can feel all over in their body cold. Sometimes it's just hands or feet. They can't get warm enough. Those are all symptoms of low thyroid. And in functional medicine, we treat subclinical hypothyroidism. We have to call it subclinical hypothyroidism because traditional medicine doesn't recognize it as hypothyroid. So we call it subclinical hypothyroidism. So yeah, there's a huge debate going on. The only thing I can tell people is go to the literature. What does the literature say about treating thyroid from a symptom management standpoint? One of the top endocrinologists in the country at Harvard University actually says that we don't treat enough thyroid. Dr. Ernie Schaefer is an acquaintance of mine. He's a board-certified cardiologist, board-certified endocrinologist, and has a PhD in lipidology, and has literally written a textbook on lipid management. And he says that we cannot manage our cardiovascular patients without managing thyroid at the same time. And he explains subclinical hypothyroidism and the impact that it has on the cardiovascular system, lipids, inflammation, blood vessel inflammation, and so on and so forth. And he's backing this up with research. There's proven research out there to show this. I have over 100 articles in my archive that back up, why we do what we do. That being said, when a person comes into the office, and we have to do this from a liability standpoint, and they tell us, listen, Dr. So-and-so says that I don't need to be on this thyroid medication. And then instead of getting into a shouting match with Dr. So-and-so, I gracefully back out and say, okay, Dr. So-and-so is going to have to manage the thyroid at this point. And typically, the unfortunate thing is it means no management at all, because they typically take them off of thyroid medicine. And the patient will usually come back in 3 to 6 months and say, would you please put me back on thyroid medication? I feel awful. I've gained all this weight back. And it's just, I'm in a bad spot again. And so at that point, we take it a case by case basis, because I don't want to do anything to go against the medical community. It's not worth it. What we do is valuable work, and to put my clinic on the line like that, we just can't do. Yeah, because and it is controversial. I hope one day it will change. I hope the traditional medical system will come around, but until then, we have to play very, very carefully. And I think we have pharmaceutical companies to thank for that. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to be ugly, but if you look at the history of Knoll Pharmaceuticals bringing Synthroid, the name brand Synthroid, into the market, into the U.S., where it had been in Europe for several years before they came, they understood that their messaging had to be to focus on TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. And most medical providers today will only use TSH. They may draw the other thyroid markers, but they will only judge their treatment, the start of treatment or the stopping of treatment or the adjustment of treatment based on TSH. That nothing could be further wrong than using that treatment modality. I check 8 different thyroid markers when I look at thyroid. Initially, I don't check those 8 every single time, but initially I'm looking at 8 different thyroid markers to make a decision, get an entire picture of what's going on with the thyroid in order to make a decision of what to do.
Wow. And so can clients reach out to you online, or do you only take clients through the clinic?
Yeah, no, clients can reach out to me online. If they're wanting to work with me personally, I have a short 23-question questionnaire that I ask them to fill out. They can go to briangBrown.com and click the link at the top of the page that says Work with Dr. B, and fill out the application. And as soon as we get the application submitted and back to us, we'll review that. And within 72 hours, my administrative assistant will reach out and schedule a free telephone consultation at a mutually convenient time. And we'll kind of talk through options and what we can do.
Awesome. And I've got to ask you, how is health hijacking our happiness, and what can we do about it?
Wow. So, it's when you look at the difference between normalization and optimization, the differences in philosophy between traditionally trained medical providers and those of us who have been traditionally trained but transitioned into more functional medicine. When we look at things through a traditional sense, it hijacks our happiness because we're leaving things untreated, whether they be supplement and nutrition markers in our body that just get ignored because it's like, oh, they fall within the normal range, or it's thyroid numbers that are ignored because they fall within the normal range. And these are clients that have symptoms. They are having problems that they're listing, and they seem to get ignored. So when those symptoms are ignored in lieu of just looking at a diagnostic number on a laboratory report sheet, that's something that's hijacking our happiness, because most people will tell you who are struggling in midlife and beyond, and I use midlife very loosely because starting around age 30, we have a 1 to 2% decline in all organ system output. And so by the time we're 45, 50, 60, 65, we've had a significant amount of decline in function, whether it be gallbladder function or liver function or hormone function or hormone conversion or thyroid output or thyroid conversion. The list goes on and on and on. And those are the things that hijack our happiness when we go to our well-intentioned, well-trained medical provider. And because of the lens that they're using, we get patted on the back and told everything's okay. Or worse yet, we get patted on the back and told everything's okay. And, oh, here's a prescription for an antidepressant because it's got to all be in your head. That's hijacking our happiness. When we're not treating root causes, that hijacks our happiness. I've actually got a book that's coming out toward the end of the year. I don't have a final date on it. I do know it's coming out in December. And it's called Happiness Hijackers, and we talk about these things in the book. So yeah, super, super excited about that book coming out and the impact that it's going to have with people and understanding the boxes that the traditional medical system puts them in and what they can do to get out of those boxes.
And I'll put a link into the show notes about how people can access that book. I believe it's just going to your website and clicking on the Inner Circle link.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. Look, Dr. Brian Brown, thank you so much. I just want to ask you, is there one tip, and I know the hydration one was a really great one, is there another thing that you can think of just off the top of your head, just something small that our listeners can start implementing that can make a massive difference to their health?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have clients do other than hydrate is take time to breathe. And I'm sure you've had people on your podcast before that have talked about breath work.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be difficult, but taking 5 minutes in the morning or in the middle of your day when you're feeling really stressed out, everybody can go to the bathroom, go into one of the stalls, close the door, and don't do anything but just breathe. And just taking that 5 minutes, the research shows the impact that it has oxygen-wise on every cell in your body, on mitochondrial function, on DNA and mRNA function is just tremendous because respiration through our lungs affects cellular respiration and expiration, meaning we're able to get those toxic gases interchanged in and out of our cell. The good gases in, bad gases out. So what we're doing on the macro level with our actual lungs, we're actually doing on the micro level with every single cell. So hydration, 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 breathe, 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 breathe.
Awesome. I'm glad you mentioned breath. And if people want to email me too at ali@ali.fitness, I'll hook you up with some breathing videos that I've done, which will really help. Just doing 5 minutes every day, like you said, Dr. Brown.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. And one last question before I let you go, something I ask all the guests on the show. Do you have a tattoo?
Do I have a tattoo? No. See, I'm one of those closet wannabes, and I have not taken the dive to do that. And the only reason I've not is I can't make the decision of what I want my first tattoo to be. It's kind of crazy.
What are you tossing up between?
I am really into lions. I think they're majestic. I think symbolically they represent strength and honor and pride. And I just can't find the right artist to do the right lion's head. And I don't know whether I want it on my forearm or on my deltoid. But I'm leaning toward a lion's head. It's very basic, but I want it done right.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that, and maybe next time we see you, you'll be endowed with a lion of sorts.
Absolutely.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you so much again.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.